the purpose of this meeting is to listen to the public. If you have heard of exploitation, is it unethical? Is it ethical? Why are people not talking about what is even exploitation? Is there anything like exploitation in research? Is it inherent in research? Some of you are members of the ethics committee. Some of you are experts in bioethics. Some of you are research participants. And some of you are students. And some of you are researchers. So some of you are members of the civil organizations, sponsors in medical research. What is your perspective? So the reason for this webinar is to listen to your perspective. We are not saying that we have the answers. Why are people not talking about it? Or is it an issue or not an issue? So your perspective is important. If you see something, you say something.
Not fully to understand the implications of the involvement in the study, essentially using people as a means to an end without considering their well-being and rights fully. Now, the public might not be speaking out against exploitations in medical research due to certain combinations of factors, maybe lack of awareness about the issues, complex ethical nuances, fear of repercussions, or maybe distrust in the medical systems and the technical nature of research protocols, well, making it very difficult to understand potential exploitations. Often, research participants might not feel empowered to voice the concerns, particularly in vulnerable populations where access to healthcare is limited and participation in studies might be seen as a privilege. I now invite the speakers to speak in details about this exploitations in the medical research and why the public remains silent about these deprivations and discriminations.
Thank you very much, Diale. Diale is a philosopher. And then it shows you that she's going to really anchor the program with me. So before we invite the speakers, I know most of you are excited. You want to say something. I want to just say that ICAEPA is the voice of the public. So we are going to do a little thing. And then first, a few housekeeping. One is that we will encourage you to put something in the chat box and a Q&A box. If you something in the Q&A box. And secondly, you should be ready to speak out. This is an unusual kind of webinar because we are for the public. That's the uniqueness of in ICAEPA. In ICAEPA, we allow the public to have their say. Why are people not speaking out? So we want to hear your perspective from your experience. Then before that, we are going to launch a poll. And then after we have launched the poll, we'll look at the statistics. Then we'll invite the speakers. So without much ado, I would like to launch the poll. Understanding exploitation. We have about 5 questions. Please, if you don't mind, could you attempt the poll? Okay. So you can close the poll and let's see the results. That's okay. We have 36% of you students, and we don't have a member of the public now. We hope to have them by the end before we go far in the webinar. We have researchers and bioethicists, 57%, academics, 7%. And where are you from? Majority of you, wow, from Africa, then rest from Europe, North, South America, then Asia, and nobody from Australia. Have you heard about exploitation in research? Wow, 82% of you. So it is not something that is on, you're not aware of it. So we have only 9% is said no, and then say not sure. Can you define exploitation? Yes. And then this research. Only majority percent said they was not sure. Do you know who has experienced exploitation in research? Almost the same number. Yes, no's, and yes, said no. Then a few percent said not sure. The last question, why do you think people are not talking about exploitation? 50%, that's a higher proportion, says no awareness. So that's important for this webinar. Then 30% say ignorance. Then 20% say people are talking about it. So I think this webinar is proper because majority of you say that people don't have awareness about exploitation, and then the other one says ignorance. Okay, let's close the poll. Thank you. So thank you for your participation in the poll, and I think we have not wasted our time organizing this webinar. Now I would like to invite 2 of our panelists today. The first panelist is Dr. Victor, and I know you might have heard of Dr. Victor. I want to say something about him. Dr. Victor is the current president of ICAEPA, International Center for Applied Ethics and Public Affairs. He is a philosopher and bioethicist. Victor specializes in research ethics, the ethics of exploitation, and in African communal ethics, social philosophy. Victor is interested in the ethics of reproductive health and the ethics of inclusivity for students with learning disabilities. With 6 years of learning experience, Victor is a academic scholarship in 2023 to 2025. He has published extensively in reputable journals such as the Journal of Medical Ethics and Medicine. And the last, deeply working on a support system for clinical trials in sub-Saharan Africa to be current challenges, new developments, and future directions. So, Victor, please help me. Let's welcome Victor Chidi Wolemonwu, the president of ICAEPA and one of our key panelists. Victor, you have the floor.
Right, thank you so much.
Yes,
all
Victor,
right,
we can
so
hear you.
let me share my slide. All right, so I'll be speaking on the ethics of exploitation in medical research, unpacking the concept. All right, so this brief presentation will run like this. Introduction. I'll look at the ethics of medical research, discuss a few traditional views, including Alan Vitamer's idea of exploitation in medical research. Critiquing Vitamer's account. So I will give a brief critique of Vitamer's account of exploitation. Then I'll look at exploitation from a Kantian perspective. So I'll discuss briefly Alan Wood's account and then my own alternative. All right. So medical research plays a pivotal role in advancing scientific knowledge about human biology and improving health outcomes through the development of preventive, therapeutic, and diagnostic interventions. But some studies involving research subjects raise ethical concerns about exploitation. So in this paper, I will unpack the concept of exploitation in medical research, and then we'll look at some traditional understanding of the concept, which revolve around lack of consent, unjustifiable exposure to risks, and then unfair distribution of benefits. So from the traditional understanding of exploitation, there are certain elements that some policymakers and bioethicists think must be examined to be able to understand what exploitation is all about. So the first one is lack of consent. So according to De Castro, he argues that researchers deceive potential participants by exaggerating benefits, thereby luring into for scientific purposes. So for him, such practices undermine informed consent, which is a cornerstone of ethical research. Then the next element is exposure to unjustifiable risk of harm. So according to Franklin Miller and Howard Brody, they argue that exploitation occurs when participants are exposed to excessive risk. Then Lampkin and Elliott also thinks that research participants can be exploited when researchers expose them to excessive risks or even offer them inadequate compensation. All right, so Alan Vitamer argues that certain transactions could be exploitative even though they are consensual, and I also agree with him. He also agreed that there are exploitative transactions that are very harmful, but not all exploitative transactions are harmful. So, for instance, observational study in which researchers attempt to understand the impact of exercise habits on the health of older adults is an example of harmless medical research, right? So, according to Vitamer, he develops an account which is based on the idea of unfair distribution of benefits. So, according to him, he thinks that exploitation, particularly for consensual interaction, occurs when one party receives proportionate benefits. For instance, a lumbar example, which he gave in his book, in which where a hurricane has happened, so the lumber seller decides to hike his price And then because the buyers are very desperate to fix their houses, they go to buy the wood from the lumber seller who has hiked his price. So in this kind of transaction, they have consented to accept whatever price the lumber has given. So this is what Vaitama calls consensual mutual beneficial exploitation. That is an exploitation in which both the exploited person and the exploiter gain substantial benefits, yet such kind of transaction is exploitative. And for him, he assumes that, or he argues that for such kind of a transaction to account as exploitative, we have to look at the market mechanism, that will determine what is exploitative or not. So for me, I argue that focusing on market mechanism as a determinant for what accounts for exploitation is problematic, particularly for clinical trials. For example, there are very clear example I can give, like the Lilly exploitation of homeless alcoholics, right? So in the US. So in this kind of case, we know that for researchers to be able to recruit people to participate in whatever studies that they have, the ethics committee determine, what should be an appropriate incentive to be given to the researchers, But in this kind of case, it is very difficult for to kind of measure what the actual amount of money to be given to researchers, the participants, to be able to be part of to be part of the study, So you can't weigh exploitation in this kind of regard, because whatever amount of money a researcher gives shouldn't pass certain benchmark. In some at one point, I've tried to argue against incentivization of research, right? Because of an issue of trying to weigh what accounts as a better incentive that wouldn't lure research participants into some sort of undue inducement. And then the second aspect is against Vaitama. The second criticism I have against Vaitama is that, focusing on market mechanism can't really account for exploitation in interpersonal relationship. For example, if a woman decides to protect her marriage, and then decide to be servile, decide to allow her husband to subdue her, provided her marriage is protected. In this kind of scenario, it is still consensual. Both parties are from it. The woman can decide to give herself as some kind of sexual object, provided she's not out of her marriage. But it is very difficult to to measure how much benefit both the husband and the woman has been able to receive. So these are some of the criticism I think I could raise, at least for now, because there are other issues with Vaitama's account. So I think that for us to begin to think about exploitation more broadly, without focusing more on distribution, unfair distribution of benefits, which Vaitama accounted, or simply on lack of consent or exposure to excessive risks, I think that we need to look at exploitation from Immanuel Kant's ethical perspective. So I begin with Alan Wood, who begins his account of exploitation from a Kantian perspective, particularly his idea of vulnerability. And he defines exploitation as taking advantage of a person's vulnerability and treating it as an opportunity to further the exploiter's end. So he argues that such treatment against a vulnerable victim is degrading. This is a plausible way to start exploitation, in my own view. But I think that Wood's account is overly inclusive because it is not in all cases that taking advantage of people's vulnerability accounts as morally wrong or exploitative. For example, like Anderson argued in one of his papers, he says that we can profit from a person's vulnerable situation based on a fair exchange without degrading or wronging them. And this is very, very important. Secondly, I think that Wood's account is incomplete as it omits the civility component of the relationship between the exploiter and the exploited. So this relationship involves an asymmetric power relations, which shows that the exploiter puts the exploited agents in situations where they become subservient to further the ends or interests of the exploiter. All right. So, to conclude this presentation, I'll give a very brief account of the alternative I provide, and that is what I dub as a Kantian civility view. So this alternative perspective posits that exploitation inherently involves civility, that is servile relationship. And in this sort of relationship, the exploiter takes advantage of a victim's vulnerability, treats them as mere means by putting them into subservient roles to further the exploiter's subjective end. So the idea of treating a person as mere means implies that a person acts on a maxim that suggests that the other interacting agent's humanity is comparatively less valuable, and that their worth or their moral worth is relevant only to the extent can utilize to further their ends. So there are two key examples that can help to explain my account of exploitation. I can use the Lily example that I pointed out, and then this non-medical example of lecherous millionaire. Let me draw an attention to the lecherous millionaire, where he decides to visit a lecherous millionaire to ask for money to be able to take her daughter to the hospital. But the millionaire says, no, I can only give you money if you become my mistress. So in this situation, the woman is very desperate to take care of the health need of her child, but the millionaire insists that the only way to be able to help her is for her to become a mistress. So in this kind of relationship, the millionaire, by making such kind of offer, has put the woman in a servile situation where the woman begins to do the bidding of the millionaire to further the millionaire's end in order for her to take care of her needs. So this is a typical example of exploitative relationship or exchange, which involves servile relations. And
again, Dr. Victor, thank you. So at this time, we would like to invite the next panelist, and that's Dr. Emanuela Midolo. So Emanuela Midolo, let me just give a brief bio about Dr. Midolo. She's a bioethicist. Midolo is a human rights attorney and expert in clinical ethics consultation. She has more than 9 years of experience in University Hospital in clinical bioethics. She was adjunct professor of bioethics, professional ethics, human rights, and history of medicine at the School of Medicine in Rome. Her major research area is clinical experimentations on humans. She is currently a research fellow for ethics at the Interdepartmental Center for Research Ethics and Integrity of the Italian Council of Research. And since 2021 to 2023, Emanuela was a visiting researcher at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. She has several publications and a crucial monograph on emergency clinical trials. So everyone, please join me. Welcome, Emanuela. Emanuela, please, you have the floor.
Hi everyone. Yes, my just presentation want to say, okay, we need to start, of course, to think first of all of the concept of vulnerability and several guidelines and norms and international documents just set up this principle that is recognized by also the Declaration of Barcelona in 2008, like a principle with the respect for person, so dignity, autonomy, and also vulnerability. So the vulnerability is also based in part from the Belmont report that reflect the principle of respect of person. But of course, the concept of vulnerability in clinical research could be related to different situation and condition. So we need to understand because could be also for extrinsic or intrinsic situation. So the CHOMS in the guideline number 15 talk about the research involving vulnerable people or group, and they affirm that we must ensure that specific protection are in place to safeguard the right and welfare of these individuals and group that are involved in the research. So we need to make a difference between the categorical vulnerability. So like, for example, for pregnancy women, for children, for people with mental issue or prisoner. And we have also to make a difference for the contextual vulnerability that is more understanding of the nature of the vulnerability than the categorical approach. So we can have cognitive, communicative vulnerability, medical vulnerability, economical vulnerability, and also social vulnerability. The Oviedo Convention in the Article 2 stated the primacy of the human being, so affirmed that the interest and the welfare of the human being shall prevail over the sole interest of the society or the science. But the problem for the conduction of the clinical research in the developing country and the risk of the exploitation is that, of course, in the developing country, the medical research can be conducted faster due to the size of the test of population, allowing a new drug to gain approval and reach markers sooner. Trial can be run faster in developing country precisely because there are so many sick people to enroll in the trial and people who may be willing to sign up for anything that they perceive like a treatment because they have no other healthcare option and who may agree to participate without properly understanding the real risk to be involved in a clinical trial. Research trial, of course, bring infrastructure, training, equipment to help poor regions of the globe. But despite this apparent advantage, the international trial have given risk to concern about the exploitation of subject enrolled by the first world drug manufacturer. This concern dominates current debate forever in international research ethics and involved the problem of the standard of the care of the informed consent and of the respect of person enrolled in the trial. I want to add also to the respect for the gender difference of the people that are involved in the clinical trial. Moreover, the problem of informed consent is even thornier due to the illness, poverty, lack of alternative care option, limited education, and language barriers. Finally, the risk of participation are typically thought to be offset by the potential benefit of the new drug provided by the community at large. But this positive risk-benefit ratio rests on the assumption of the communities from which participants draw will actually have reasonable access to the fruit of the research once the trial is completed. So in the developed country, this assumption is not true because given the absence of the effective healthcare infrastructure for developing drug, low per capita healthcare spending, and low per capita income. A large number of ethicists argues that the standard of care must be globally understood, so the trial sponsor must at very last make their product reasonable available for the post-trial, and that efforts must be made to guarantee that consent is genuinely informed and uncoerced. If they will not apply in this essential prescription, they claim will be to exploit third world vulnerability for the first world gain. Of course, the history of medical research and the need, the protection of vulnerable people through specific regulation has clearly arisen after the cruel and horrible episode of human exploitation in experiments conducted in the name of the science, but not conducted in the interest of the people involved. Studies on vulnerable population have involved at different time, prisoner, semi-illiterate farmer, children, adults with cognitive mental illness, and also the The Tuskegee syphilis studies is a very example of this. It differs also coded we have after this cruel treatment in the name of science is the Nuremberg Code that establishes the ability of the subject to express a free and informed consent as an indispensable condition for conducting any research with human. These are the Article 1. Where affirm the voluntary consent of human subject is absolutely essential. So the person of the group of the person are be able to exercise free without to exercise free without any intervention, coercive element, deception, coercion, facility, or other form of imposition or violence. So they have sufficient knowledge and understanding of the elements of the situation in which he or she will involve it, such as to put him in a position to make a conscious and enlightened decision. The new version of the WMA Declaration of Helsinki that was signed in October 2024 start to make a step more for the protection of the exploitation in clinical research, especially in the point 9, where affirm that it's duty of physician to protect life, health, dignity, integrity, autonomy, privacy, confidentiality, or personal information of the research participants. Moreover, affirm a very important stuff in 10 points, where say that physician and other researcher must consider the ethical, legal, and regulatory norm and standard for research involving human participant in the country or countries in which research originated, and where it is be performed, as well as applicable in international norm and standards, and that no nation or international ethical, legal, and regulation requirement should reduce or eliminate any other type of protection that is established in the Declaration for Research Participants. In the number 11, the Declaration of Helsinki established that medical research should be designed and conducted in a manner that avoid or minimize harm to the environment and strives for environmental sustainability. Moreover, in the point 12, say that scientific integrity is essential to conduct of medical research involving the human participant, and the involved individuals, teams, and organizations must never engage research misconduct. That is very important. And also in this point, and in another that I will tell you in a minute, just put more in evidence the importance of the ethic by design. So the physician, researcher, sponsor have to be clear in the mind what will be the possible risk, harm, or ethical issue in a clinical trial since the start. So all the protocol must be developed by taking in mind the ethics. Moreover, in the point 13, the WMA say that the group that are independent in medical research should be provided appropriate access to participate in research. In the part related to the risk, burden, and benefit, it is very clear that measures to minimize the risk and burden must be implemented. The risk or burden must be continuously monitored, assessed, and documented by research. Moreover, the medical research with individual group and communities that are in situation of vulnerability is only justified if it is not possible any type of experimentation in other group that is not vulnerable, and the research should be only include those that is in a particular situation that require that type of clinical trial. The design and performance of the medical research involving human participant must be clearly described and justified in the scientific protocol, and also the protocol must contain a statement of the ethical consideration, so involved and should indicate how the principle of the declaration will be addressed. So protocol should be include information regarding aims, method, anticipated benefit, potential risk, burden, qualification of the researcher, source or funding if there is, any potential conflict of interest, provision to protect also the privacy, confidentiality, incentive for participant is provided, and also the consequence of the participation. So the protocol must be described in any section and also for the post-trial provision. In the part related to the ethics committee, the WMA with the new version of the Declaration of Helsinki established that the committee must take into the consideration the ethical, legal and regulatory norm and standard of the country or countries in which the research is to be performed, as well as applicable international norm and standard, but this must not be allowed to reduce or eliminate any kind of protection that is already established in the declaration. So the research protocol must be approved by ethics committee in both countries, so in the original part where it is designed and also in the country where it is conducted. Last but not least, the WMA affirmed that free and informed consent is essential. So need special attention to communicate need of the individual that are potential participants, as well as the methods and used, and also the delivery of the information. So we need to respect ethical milestone in any kind of clinical trial that are conducted, especially in the trials that is conducted on population that are vulnerable, so involving people that are in a vulnerable context. The needs to protect vulnerable people in clinical trial and the imperative that the interest of well-being of the individual must always prevail on the sole interest of the science and the society. And this is very important, especially when we have involved the people that for a condition of vulnerability that could be intrinsic or extrinsic require our attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuela, for your explanation. Thank you for the concept and the theories round of exploitation and the guidances from the SIAM's guidelines, from the Declaration of Helsinki and other guidelines. So thank you so much. And apologies again for not being able to share your screen. And I know that the participants will be asking if your slides will be available. We will let them know. Thank you very much. So,
sure, of course.
yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Now we would like to go to the panel session, and we have questions already. I would want to reserve the questions for each of the presenters to the panel, because like I said, this webinar is for everyone. It's for the public to ask you, questions and share their perspectives, not just asking, but also making contributions. So once again, I want to thank the speakers, Dr. Victor and Dr. Emanuela, for your fantastic, wonderful presentation. And then we will see again in the panel session. So at this time, I want to inform everyone that we'll be going to the panel session. And please get ready. We will mute you. If you have any question, please, you raise your hands. We'll recognize you. And when we ask you, we allow you to ask your questions. I'll be moderating this session of the panel with Dr. Piali. And I believe it's going to be a robust session, but that's what we've been waiting for. We'll be eager to hear from our participants from all over the world. Thank you. So, are we ready for the panel session? Yes, I think we are ready. Now, before we go into the panel session, I just have an icebreaker question for the two panelists. And one question I will ask you. Piali will help me with the question on the Q&A box. She's going to share those questions from the audience. But I have a question, and that question is, exploitation, is it possible to conduct medical research without any form of exploitation? You know, they say there's no level of exploitation. Is it possible? Is research or medical research inherently exploitative? So let's start with that. Yeah.
Thank you for that beautiful question. Yeah, so I think exploitation, we can conduct medical research without exploitation, but because of the capitalistic orientation of most pharmaceutical companies, most researchers, most funders, it seems, they think that it is not possible, but it is not true. It is very much possible. We're always in a hurry to make money. Researchers are in a hurry to conduct, to engage in studies. But actually, many studies have shown that some of these studies that they spend so much money on, some of them are not viable. Even though they involve some kind of unethical situation, they are not really viable. It is not all the studies that have been engaged in that brought out very good results. We know that very well. For instance, the Tuskegee research that Dr. Midolo pointed out. Some persons, the process of recruiting people, it is possible for you to recruit people, especially those who are very sick, and then also ensure that their health and well-being are well taken care of. But these Black Americans' health, we are not taking care of. Even when the medicine that normally they could have been administered to was available, they were not given. The syphilis medicine, they were not given. They were not taken care of. So it is possible that we can conduct research. In fact, that is why some documents, some ethics codes have clearly shown that if you are trying to conduct a research that exposes the participants to unjustifiable risk of harm, they are telling you that even though the social benefit of that research is so huge, stop it. Particularly SIOM 2016 clearly states it. So if it is not possible, if the social or scientific benefit of research outweighs the impact or the rights to respect health and dignity and well-being of researchers, then it means that anything could be allowed. But these documents have shown that we can actually do science, we can actually conduct medical research and conduct them in a way that protects the right, the dignity and health and well-being of participants. That is why Emanuela concluded that we should be very careful in the kind of research that we conduct, that regardless of the benefit of any research, that we must take into account the dignity, the health, the well-being of those participating in research, because it is possible for us to protect this vulnerable population.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. Thank you. Your response is that it is possible that we can we call it non-exploitative kind of framework. That yes, we can do research without exploitation. And before we move to other speakers, Piali, you have something to say about this?
Yes, I'd like to take up from here. I'd like to ask Victor and the other panelists, should we disapprove a research protocol just because it is exploitative? And then another question is, why do we feel that coercive subservient relationship always entails exploitation in medical research? Is there any behavioral pattern to show that coercion always follows exploitation?
Yeah, thank you, Piali. Now, just like the first question, should we now disapprove the research because it has a form of exploitation? Now, very important question that Piali has asked. But before we move out of that one, because Victor said, yeah, that we can. I want to ask, before we move to the next question that Piali asked, please, Emanuela, what do you think? Can we avoid research that it has? Is it possible to have non-exploitative research like Victor has said it is possible?
I agree with Victor. We can conduct, of course, any kind of clinical trial also in the developed country. We need to just respect dignity, protection for the, also physical person and the autonomy of the person. But we need to, we can make clinical research, good clinical research, but we have to make clinical research that is useful for these people. We cannot use people for the society. We need to improve clinical research in that country for help them. So we need to understand this. It's very important. It's a respectful thing. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Yes, I can see the hand of Mike. Mike, please. I know are you agreeing with the experts that we can do without exploitation research? Thank you, Mike. You have the floor.
Well, I just wanted to add something that might be a little provocative, but I think that individual researchers doing clinical trials or not have limited ability to address the kind of structural vulnerabilities that lead to people living in exploitative environments in some sense. And so when we work in communities where there are vulnerabilities that are existing, right? We may also want to think about, obviously, we don't want to introduce research specific, right, exploitative practices to those people. But when you think about what it takes to provide adequate subject participant protections, right, that will look different in different communities, depending on what the baseline is in the community where you're working. And so some of that, I think can be addressed through enhancing knowledge of the communities, as you're preparing to do research. And there are some things that are probably outside of researchers' control, but I'm just sort of wrestling myself with that issue because research also brings benefits to that community. So there's an element of evaluating the potential benefit of working in those communities while acknowledging the vulnerabilities that exist when you're engaging them.
Thank you very much. Excellent. I know your emphasis on the vulnerability or the particular context where the research is going on. And I want to know whether, Pial, is anyone on the platform? Is there any person that wants to ask any question? Because here we want to also hear from the participants. Is there anyone that want to take a question from a participant? So please could you check? And if you have any question among the participants, this is your time. Because the experts are saying you can conduct research without being exploitative. We have people who have said, well, it depends. If you have what we call consensual exploitation, and where there is no harm, you take care of everything, but you get some benefits, and then not as the same as that of the participants. So would you call that exploitation? And some people say, yeah, as long as you've taken care of autonomy, taken care of distributive justice, taken care of standard of care, will you still say that is exploitation? And even if it is it something to worry about? So we want to wait for the participants. Any of them, we could say something different from us, just reinforce what the speakers and Mike have said. Do we have anyone? Please raise your hands. That's we could recognize you and then allow you to ask your question. Feel free to ask your question. Can we say a research? Yes, okay, Rosangela, please go ahead.
Just a remark. Maybe when researchers ask people to participate in some studies in clinical trials in foreign countries, which language do they use? I mean, we use English to speak together to understand us during this webinar. But when researchers come from, for example, US or France or Japan, go in a country where do not speak the local language, and do they try to explain what there are purposes with a clinical trial to people that do not speak English, that do not speak Japan, do not speak French? Isn't it some form of coercion for these people? Do they feel that they have to agree with these foreign people, foreign researchers coming from afar, in order to not delude them in some way in asking a participation in a clinical trial? I'm not sure I'm very clear with this idea, but just I'm wondering about the problem of language.
Thank you, Rosangela. I know the issue of exploitation is complex, and not everybody believes that the exploitation happens in all clinical research. It's all about benefits and risk. And from the experts that have spoken, the philosophers of the bioethics, some people could argue for or against that if I go out to conduct clinical trial or medical research or any kind of research, I have an intention to benefit from the research. And like you cited Tuskegee and Nazi experiments, these are scandalous experiments. And if we have experiments there where the researcher do not have the intention to harm, or intention to withhold standard of care, intention to exploit the vulnerability of the participants, but to benefit, and then his benefit is maybe higher than the benefit of the participants, that is usually what we find out in the research ecosystem. There's a form of benefit. I wouldn't go into research if I don't have benefits. Then you look at the benefits. The benefit may not be to the researcher. The benefit may be to the future participants. And also, some have argued that if the participant in that research has the opportunity of benefiting from that research, then even though you could see the different weights of benefits, then you could say, well, it's exploitative, but it could be justified that I get more from you, but you have nothing to lose. You have also something mutually beneficial from being part of the research. If there is no benefit from the research, then I wouldn't get into that research. Another argument is this, that the future participant, for example, if you are conducting a pediatric clinical trial, and then they say, this child does not have direct benefits, but there is some risk, but the risk is not more than minimal, or it's a more than minimal risk, but the knowledge derived from that research is for the children or the pediatric population that will benefit from that research. One, if the benefit that the children will have derived from that research will not be so exaggerated, will not be so high, so big compared to the benefit of those who are currently in that research, then we say that is a form of exploitation, but it is not something that we should worry. Second argument is this. If the benefit of the participant in that research could be balanced by having some of the participants benefiting from that research, then it's something that we may not need to worry. The other one is this. If a researcher goes to a vulnerable population, then, for example, Emanuel, Ezekiel, and Grandy, and he fulfills all the other requirements for ethical research in that country, that vulnerable population. It derives benefit, but the outcome of the research also benefits that population, not exploiting the population based on the vulnerability. We have some benefits. I get some benefits, but you are not worse off by my benefits, even though there's a form of exploitation, but it is mutually consensual, and then we also derive something from there. There's social benefit, there's local standard of care, but I get something more than your own. If that is the definition of exploitation, then we can say, yes, we cannot actually go out or avoid exploitation, but that exploitation should not be disapproved, like Piali asks, by the ethics committee. But I am not the expert here. You are the expert. I'm only saying that's one of the arguments that we put forth. No. And Victor, I know you're the expert, but let me say before I go back to you, I want to be sure that everybody has spoken, and let me be sure that Piali, could you check the box if anyone has something different or agreeing with the experts that we can avoid exploitation. But like I said, exploitation, everybody, we have different perspectives, and it's complex. And sometimes people say that is exploitation, depending on where they are looking at. So, Piali, if you have any other question from anyone, so that we can study this aspect and move to the next one. You asked the question. Yeah. Okay, Victor, while we wait for Piali, please go ahead.
All right. So I think one of the questions Piali asked was why do we feel the coercive subservient relationship entails exploitation? I think in my account of exploitation, it doesn't involve, it is not limited to coercion, because people can consent to bad exchange. It doesn't necessarily, like I've also argued that even the idea of undue inducement doesn't necessarily translate to coercion. There is some kind of informed consent in that. Even it could be strong, it could be weak, but it is not outrightly coercive. I think that my argument of coercion in that context is if you put somebody in a very bad situation and then you create another situation whereby the person will begin to a kind of align to your bid. So it means that even though you did not force that person to act in certain way, but you've participated in his or her vulnerability. So if you participate in an individual or putting an individual in a vulnerable situation, and then you use that person to further your end, then that is where we begin to talk about coercion. But in a situation whereby you look at an individual situation, particularly socio-economic situation, and then you begin to take advantage of that person because the person does not really have a very clear-cut alternative, to address that problem, and you think that, okay, in order for me to deal with, address this person's situation, this person has to do XYZ for me. I think that is where I begin to see the problem of exploitation and servility. Now, like during my presentation.
Sorry, Victor. Yes, sorry, Victor. I have to, sorry. Yeah, because of the time. Thank you. But
I think
also,
Midolo wants to,
yes, I'm going to give access to Midolo, is that we don't want to see research as something that a researcher intentionally goes out to put to harm premium non-necessary. First, do no harm. Researchers, ideally or traditional or naturally, do not go out to put someone in a vulnerable situation. But what I insist from our perspective, researcher has something to benefit. We're looking at the benefit you have, and if your benefit puts the other person in a harm situation, then we can look at it. But the researcher does not go out to harm or put someone in a vulnerable situation. But let's hang it there, and then let's come back to you again. So, Emanuela, please, what's your perspective?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to add something. Yes, you're right. We are at risk of exploitation. In any case, we have in front of us people that are vulnerable. So, for example, I think also the emergency research without the possibility to ask informed consent, if it's not make for the benefit of the patient and is not evaluated the minimal risk and minimal burden, there is the risk of exploitation also that. So we have to examine it to be clear that we have, if we make research on vulnerable person, we have to put in mind for first thing, we have no make harm to that person, first of all. To the second thing, we have to do this for the best interest of the people that are involved. So in that case of the emergency clinical trial that we risk the exploitation too, we need to focalize that we have no other treatment for that kind of patient that cannot give informed consent, for example. So I need to make in science and constraints of a researcher the best interest for the person that I try to save, right? To put in safe. So that's important. In a clinical trial, we need to have as a focus in mind the best interest of people that we involved and the respect for that person.
Excellent. Thank you. We may move to the next question, but I would like to say something here that at least when the researcher gets into the community and he looks at, like you said, the best interest of the community or best interest of the participants, and he looks at the target population. If your population is a developed country and you come to Nigeria to conduct your research, but those who are going to benefit from the research is, let's say, the US or the United Kingdom, that is questionable. And so, except you make ensure that the participants or the population benefit from your research. And secondly, while you are conducting your research, you make sure that everything is put in place. There is local standard of care. And when you say standard of care, means standard of care in that population. Some people, when they emphasize standard of care, they refer to standard of care that is not feasible or available in that local environment. Then thirdly, you ensure that what it takes to become legal, effective, informed consent is also part of the study. If a participant, for example, is told, you are going to be on this study, even if we have seen something out, there is no equipoise, that we know that this thing is inferior, but we are going to be on this study, and this is the risk you're going to be part of, you're going to experience this risk, and then, but this is the benefit of this research, and this and that. So we feel that the ethics committee could weigh the benefit and risk, and also look at those, even if it's not the current participants, the future participants. But like we said, issue of exploitation from the pool that we got is not sufficiently explored. And I think that ICAEPA has done something great by starting this series of webinars. And I think we are going to have more future conversation about this beyond this webinar. We're still going to ask for contributions beyond the webinar. So because of the time, I would like to move to the next question. And before Piali goes to that next question, we have a question on the box from Miriam. How can researchers ensure participants fully understand the risk, benefits, and purpose of a study, particularly in the communities with low literacy level or limited health knowledge? Rosangela was talking about literacy level. So the question, please, Dr. Victor, could you answer this question? How can researchers ensure participants fully understand the risk, benefits, and purpose of a study, particularly in communities with low literacy level or limited health knowledge? Yeah, Victor?
Yeah, I think many ethics code provide that before you go into any host community, especially where the literacy level is very low, you get a translator, you get someone that can help you, who understands the community, who will be able to explain what you are doing, because it is very, very important, to be able to speak to the people, particularly your potential participants. You speak to them in the language they will understand. You explain clearly the purpose of the study. You explain clearly, why you've come to the community to kind of conduct the research. But sometimes, currently, there's this kind of translation, this language translation that, has been powered by AI. So either you adopt that or you use a traditional person that can help to explain to the community people. I think part of the challenge with this middleman thing is that people can use it as an advantage to recruit certain set of people and use it to their own. That is, it could create some sort of unethical problems, around it. Yeah. But what is most important is, before you go to any host community, first of all, you understand the terrain, the literacy level, and then you seek support, very transparent support, and ensure that those who are participating really understand the risks, involved in what they are doing. And then another emphasis is, you don't go to a community simply to recruit people. It is immoral, it is unethical, it is exploitative, and regardless of whatever benefit you want to give, because research shows that if, for instance, you want to conduct certain research and you decide to target a specific group, the outcome of that research might not give you a broad perspective to what you really need. So even in the course of outcome too, it has its own advantage. This is why we try to argue for, if you want to go to a community, first of all, let it be that the community you're going to, there is a situation you want to address. If it is malaria, okay, malaria is endemic in this particular community. It simply means that you're researching based on the needs of that community. But if that community has nothing to do with malaria, but you're going there because you can easily give them money as incentives, as benefit and all that. For me, as Victor, there is no justification for that, regardless of whatever benefit that is into that community.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victor. Thank you so much. So we need to engage our community. You need to know your community. It's not ethical to parachute into a community and then administer questionnaire, take samples, and then parachutes and then fly out. You need to engage your community. You need to ensure that the literacy level of that community matches what you have in your informed consent process, not just document process. Thank you very much, Victor, and excellent response. So we need to look at another question. Rosangela is going to answer this question because of time. Are vulnerable populations targeted for research, merely because of their accessibility, poverty, or lack of regulation, rather than scientific necessity? So we just have a minute or two for this question because of time. Please, Rosangela, could you just answer this question?
Is it Midolo?
No, Rosangela, I'm coming to Midolo. Midolo will be answering last before we leave. So, Rosangela, Rose, would like to answer this question live. So we just have a minute for this question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that maybe we have to make one step back, in the sense that when researchers go to ask consent from people to participate in the research, they have a ethics by design protocol. I mean, the fundamental ethical issues and questions have to be discussed before in researchers community, with researchers representative, patients representative in the local community where they want to go and ask consent to people. They have almost, not at all, but almost resolved all the ethical issues about making a clinical trial in a certain community. And I think that is a way to respond to the first, do not harm. And then is the way to respect people, respect their dignity, and try to enhance benefits for them coming from a certain clinical trial. Without any resolved before ethical issues, or almost resolved before ethical issues. Researchers cannot do a very good job in that community when they ask for consent, when they ask for, when they explain what they want to do with a particular clinical trial. And more important, researchers need to guarantee a follow-up to people that participated in the clinical trial. They need to guarantee that these people will not be alone while the clinical trial has finished after 1 year or 2 years. And this is a very important issue, particularly when the vulnerable communities are vulnerable by economic condition, illness condition, cultural conditions, and so on.
Yeah,
I
thank you very
hope to have reply.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that question was fully exhausted. Thank you very much. And I saw something in the chat box by Malbona from Nigeria. Yes, the Declaration of Helsinki. We know that the word, the use of research subjects been changed to participants. It shows you that we're not referring to subject like an inanimate object or something that we look at the power balance. The participants, we are co-participating. We are also important stakeholders in research. So in the series of webinars we'll be having, once we talk about research participants, we are mindful of the word research subjects, and we hope that those in the Code of Federal Regulations and other regulations in other countries of the world will begin to migrate from saying research subjects to research participants. Thank you, Ma, for that contribution. Emanuela is going to be closing the questions, but before she closes the question, I know Pierre has a second question to ask, and I want to thank everyone for contributing. We're going to be having more of this seminar, and I can say, I know some of you may not agree with me, but you have the right to disagree. That's why we're in ethics, that we have not fully exhausted the issue of exploitation research. So we're going to have a part B of this. I think Victor will allow me to say yes. We'll have a part B to this. So before Emanuela ends the questions, Piali has one second question she asked that I think, Piali, am I correct? That's one question you left that Emanuela will now close the session with that answer. Piali, please, you have the floor again.
It's not like a question. It's like the need of the global south is different from the need of the global north. So when there is any kind of clinical research, what is that we can chart a common, is it possible to chart a common global ethical rule for both the global south and the global north? Or should we take it into considerations the local need or the need of the local community before we chart out any ethical rules? That is what I want to know.
Excellent. Emanuela, please, you have the floor for this.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for the question. It's very important for me. Yes, I think both, because some declaration, some guideline is internationally. So we have to make a common focus together, a common framework on what we can do, what we can not to do in a clinical trial, of course. So we need to do this. But moreover, I think that is very more important also for what Rosangela said before. We need to make a hard work before to talk with the person that are involved in a clinical trial. We need to make a research ethics by design. So the researcher, the sponsor need to understand before to submit that clinical trial, which are the different ethical issues that can be arise, which are the minimal burden or harm that can come out of that trial. And moreover, we need to contribute in a good approval of protocol, so in a good exam of the protocol, also with the community. For example, in Europe, there is the new regulation for clinical trial that involve a human subject that provide that association, patient association or community are involved in the decision of a clinical protocol in the ethics committee. The same thing, for example, in the US with the community consultation. So they take into the opinion of the community where the clinical trial will be conducted. So it's important, it is crucial. So for me, it's important, yes, international focus, but we need more important to make a community between the general part where is ideated, where is designed the protocol, and where is the local committee. So the local ethics committee needs to say something. Yes, it's for us. No, it's not good for us. Community is exploitation. So I need this is important.
Excellent, thank you. So before we round this, I call it first part A of the webinar on exploitation. Before I ask Victor and Emanuela and Mike and everyone, why are we silent about it? First thing I would like to say, one is that we'll agree that the concept of exploitation is not straightforward. And and we have different aspects, different way of looking at it. And so we would not encourage an ethics committee to start looking for non-exploitative research. They need to understand what is exploitation. And in the context of that research, that local research, like say, take it by each research is peculiar, unique. You don't have a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. This research we are looking at, is it exploitative? If you say we are not going to have non-exploitative kind of framework, you refer to every kind of research for the ethics committee. The ethics committee has to look at the criteria for approval of research. You look at, like you said, you have to look at the local context. How are they going to benefit from this research? So what is the weight of benefits? And then for the researchers, what is the weight of the benefits? So you calculate, you do the risk-benefit analysis. Look at the context, look at the social benefits, look at other requirements for informed consent, and if it's a vulnerable population, look at the additional protection. And so, and then we cannot now say, ethics committee, check, is there any exploitation? It depends also on what you think is exploitative. The exploitation in the research is not going to be seen as exploitation in other areas of life. If we don't have a consensus on this, that means we need to explore this further. That comes to the question, why are people not talking about it? It means that we have different perspectives, and that is why ICAEPA has come in. ICAEPA has come in to give the public voice to share their perspective about this. So having said that, I want to throw one more question because we are short of time. So why do we not talk about this? You can imagine the dust it has raised now. See the different perspective. Victor, the philosopher, went in and then brought us these things out, and then Emanuela had to cap it up, and then we are looking at it from different views. So I think there's a reason why we're not talking about it, because we don't even know what it means. We don't even know. Risk and scandal does not equal exploitation. But we know that we can have exploitation in scandals. But the fact that exploitation is involved in research does not mean it's scandalous. So why are we not talking about this? Can anybody really a minute, tell me why you think people are not talking about this? From your perspective, Mike, and any person, Piali, Los Angeles, Victor, why are we silent about it? Yeah.
Well, two quick things. One is the good news is we are talking about it now.
Excellent.
So this is a good effort. And the other thing I think I would say is that there are some people talking about it whose voices aren't being heard. And that is part of the solution, I think, is amplifying the voices of communities that understand what they might have experienced, but an outlet to be able to communicate, and everybody else needs to listen.
Excellent. We are beginning to talk about it. I think we continue to talk about it next time. So, Emanuela, what do you have to say?
Yes. Yes, this is great. I'm very happy to be part of talking about this, and I consider it very crucial and important for a good ethical research.
Excellent. Ibrahim, do you have anything to say? Something?
I'd like to say something, if
Yes.
I'm allowed to. So individuals from the marginalized community who might be disproportionately recruited for research due to limited health care access may feel pressured to participate without voicing concerns, and there may be lack of awareness, and they may feel face kind of a challenge for the public to identify and articulate concerns about potential exploitative practice. So that may sometimes silence their voices.
Excellent. Yes. Or they have something to benefit. If they talk, they may likely lose from the benefits. Excellent. Rosanjali, do you have anything to add? Ibrahim?
Yeah, I totally agree with Emanuela and Piali. That's and Mike as well. That's important to start speaking about this argument. And then it's important also that people are willing to listen to the discussion. Thank you very much for this initiative.
Yeah, people should be willing to listen to the discussion, and we are beginning to have the discussion. This is not going to be the end of the discussion. Samson, you have anything to say, Samson or Ibrahim? Hello, Samson, Ibrahim, any of you? So why are we not talking about it? Now we're beginning, Mike said we are beginning to talk about it. We're going to be part of this discussion. I'm leaving the philosopher president to now say one or two words why we're not talking about it, then we close for this first part of this conversation. We will continue to have these. Participants, I know that is something that has like you ignited fire now, and the fire is burning. We're going to continue to talk about it until it gets to the last person that need to hear about exploitation. So Samson or Ibrahim, anybody? And then I will welcome Victor to now tell us, in addition to what everybody has said, why you think this is important that we're having this webinar today? Yeah, Victor?
Very interesting points and very insightful. So I think for me, why people are not talking about it is simply ignorance, because they are not conscious of the fact that they are being exploited. Because most researchers and funders try to paint a picture of research being some sort of job opportunity, being some kind of opportunity for people to meet their ends. So they capitalize on this particular transactional arrangements. And when people see an opportunity to make, for instance, when Lilly researchers recruited the homeless alcoholics, I was reading so many literature around it. Some of these homeless alcoholics said, oh, if we see this opportunity again, we are going to get it. Regardless of the harm, regardless of the humiliation, regardless of being used as some kind of an object of research, they didn't bother about it because there is an incentive to get from it. So I think that lack of proper information, ignorance, like Piali said, lack of awareness that your dignity is, being disrespected, your health, your well-being is being trampled upon. You're just treating yourself as an object, as a servile entity, to further certain scientific ends. So it like many of those raised points I've said, the moment people begin to become conscious of exploitation, even those who are doing funding researchers will begin to feel very, very comfortable about it, because there is this idea, research, people that participate in research, there should be some sort of exploitation embedded in it. But like I and Midolo have argued, we can actually have research that is void of exploitation. And being aware of this idea of exploitation too will help people to begin to, become conscious of what they are participating in, and certain practices, research practices, happening within their community.
Excellent, Victor, excellent. All these speakers. Let me tell you something that you have done today. You have raised the awareness. Some students are here from Nigeria, from Ambrosial University, some researchers from Ira Specialist Teaching Hospital, from other parts of the country, Nigeria, from the bioethicists are here, and that people are from other developed world. Something we have achieved today, and I want to celebrate every one of you for that, is that the idea of the concept of exploitation, now it becomes something that is topical, something that even the ethics committee would go back now and say, okay, we have been looking at risk-benefit analysis, we are looking at the criteria for approval. Can we look at exploitation as well? And so I want to congratulate ICAEPA for being the voice of everyone, and I would want to ask everyone here, and those who are not here and those who are going to watch the recordings, please be part of ICAEPA. ICAEPA mission is to promote engagement with the public. And that is why I call this webinar unusual webinar, because the webinar where nothing, like in ethics, nothing is wrong, nothing is right. You don't have the best answer, I don't have the best answer, but we share our perspective and we come to a common front. So ICAEPA is for the public, and it's the voice of the public, and it's for public affairs. So we'll be having more of these webinars. And so I want to use this opportunity first to thank the participants. Without you, couldn't be here. So many of you registered, and some of you have stayed till this time. Like I said, the issue of exploitation is not it's not common. And people don't discuss it. Not because they shy away, but because it is complex, it is complicated. And so if we spend the next 3 hours here, I'm not sure we're going to go home and with a clear answer of pathway on how to manage exploitation in medical research. But I think the conversation has just started, and ICAEPA is leading the way. So please join ICAEPA. You can go online. Ibrahim will send you the link and become member of the same voice of the public, voice of the vulnerable, voice of research participants, voice of the public will pay taxes for this research to happen in global south, in developing, even in developed world. Who says that exploitation doesn't happen in developed world? So that is what we have started now. You may not have appreciated everything that has happened, but we've just ignited a flame. And this flame will continue until exploitation becomes something that even a child that is involved in pediatric research will ask one question: please, am I being exploited? Is it because I'm a kid and I don't have my say and my parents have to say something? Then someone asks you, kid, who told you about exploitation? Say, ICAEPA told me about exploitation. So we hope to partner with students and everyone on this journey until we are very sure that the aspect of exploitation in medical research, that the public have their sufficient say about it. Thank you, our participants from all over the world. Thank you, our guest panelists. Dr. Victor, the president of ICAEPA, and Dr. Emanuela. And we want to appreciate both of you for doing justice to this first part. I call it first part. It's the first toe in the waters. Thank you, Piali, for co-moderating with me and Rosangela. Thank you, Benga. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ibrahim, for being there on the ICT, and Samson, and all the directors at ICAEPA. I want to wish you a wonderful time as we continue to explore more about this exploitation, and then believe that one of these days we're going to say, yes, we have done justice to it. Have a wonderful time. Bye.
Thank you.
So
Bye.
before you go, if you have any more questions, please use the email that we sent to you to ask other questions. And if you could easily visit our website to, if we have not addressed any of your questions. And if there are other things, we can also use the email you sent to engage you. Have a wonderful day. Greet your friends and family. Bye.